like to welcome you to the fall tour. I'm John Justin. I'm the chairman for the Morrison County Chapter MCCL. We're hosting this today. I'm going to start right off. I would like to introduce Steve Wenzo. Steve Wenzo just ran for the Senate District 10, and he came in real close. And he'd like to speak to you for just a few minutes before we get started with the rest of the program here. So, Steve?
I came here tonight simply to say a grateful thank you to MCCL for their endorsement of me in the campaign. It meant a lot to me when the Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life put out a great statement of endorsement for me, and I came to say thank you. I've been as disappointed as I was in the election relative to, coming in close. Nevertheless, I felt great about the fact that I had MCCL support. I'm going to mention to you two things: that I'm devoting my time, my spare time in this campaign to the election of Dr. Scott Jensen for governor, and also for Jim Schultz for Attorney General. I'm on his committee for Attorney General of Minnesota. We have to absolutely make a change in those two offices. And then people are asking me if I'm a candidate. I want to clarify for the state senate as a write-in. Much as I appreciate people's support, I'm asking people not to do that because I think it's important we elect the Republican candidate who won the primary. We might disagree with him in terms of his unconventional style and behavior, but in terms of his positions on the issues, he's 100%. He answered MCCL's questionnaire 100% to their satisfaction, and control of the Senate is close right now by one vote. We have to maintain control of the Senate, the House, and the governorship if we are going to pass a law restricting abortions, whatever they decide in the compromise at 15 weeks or from conception. Anything is going to be better than what we have now. And so I am confident that with MCCL's great help at the Capitol and their leadership advice, they will make the right decisions. I'm not going to worry about it. But I am worried about having a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. We have to do that. So with your help and God's help, we'll achieve that. Thank you.
Okay, I am recording this program, and it will be on Channel 180 Local Access here in Little Falls, but you can also watch it on Great River Arts YouTube channel. And we also, as many of you know, we have our commemoration dinner every last Sunday of January, and all those past dinners, not all of them, but a lot of those past dinners have been recorded and are also on the channel now. You can watch our past dinners and past speakers. We're presently planning our next dinner that's coming January. If you want to talk to me afterwards, you have some ideas for some speakers, go ahead and approach me and write them down, because we're looking for our ideas for our speakers for the next one. For any of you that may be new to this, to us and to this area, I did bring some newsletters. There are the yellow ones. I just placed them there a few minutes ago. So if you want to grab a newsletter and see what's going on, or if you've thrown your last one away and want to review what's going on, there is one change that we decided at this meeting today that we just had. Our next meeting is not going to be on the 22nd. It's going to be on the 15th. That's Tuesday at the Courtyard Apartments at 7 p.m. The address of the Courtyard Apartments is on that newsletter. But so we moved up a week because we need to do a little better planning for our dinner, and there's a conflict on the day that we had originally planned. So that date has been changed for our meeting. You're all welcome to come. We would enjoy your input to help us become a better chapter. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Paul Strack. He is the community... Stark? Sorry. Well, I can edit that out of the video, so I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to now introduce Paul Stark. He's the communications director for the state office, and he'll give us the presentation for the fall tour.
All right, good evening. Thank you all for being here. So this past year has been an unusually eventful year for the pro-life movement. And this time that we're in right now is an especially important time as we look toward the future and think about how can we protect unborn children and support their mothers going forward. So I'm really excited to speak with you all this evening about that. So my name is Paul Stark. I work for Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life, or MCCL. I know many of you are very long-time members of MCCL, but if you are new to MCCL, we are a statewide pro-life organization. We've actually been around since 1968, which is 5 years before Roe v. Wade legalized abortion. There was an effort in the late 1960s to try and legalize abortion in our state, and MCCL formed in response to that, and we've been going ever since. So we work through three main avenues. We do pro-life educational work, and legislative work, and then political action. So we work educationally to try to inform the public about the humanity of the unborn child, the inhumanity of abortion, the positive alternatives to abortion that are available for women in need. We do that through different programs and events. We also work legislatively at the state capitol in St. Paul to try to advance pro-life legislation and to combat anti-life legislation. And then we work through political action as well. We have a couple of political action committees that support candidates for office. Now, this meeting tonight is not a political meeting in the sense of endorsing candidates and telling you who to vote for, but we will be speaking about the races and where the candidates stand on this issue and what the stakes are. We're going to talk about where we are right now. So the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, but what does that mean for Minnesota? What's our situation? We'll talk about that. Where are we going? We'll talk about what the elections this fall could mean in terms of what kinds of legislation we can have protecting human life. What are the stakes for unborn children and their mothers in the election? Then finally, we're going to talk briefly about what can we do going forward. How can we advance the pro-life cause in this post-Roe v. Wade Minnesota that we are now in. Okay, so where are we now? Now, in June, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its Dobbs versus Jackson decision. Now, let me back up a little bit and say that Roe v. Wade, I mean, most of you know this, but Roe v. Wade was the 1973 U.S. Supreme Court ruling that wiped away the laws protecting unborn children nationwide. It said that the United States Constitution actually includes a right to abortion that requires that states have a policy of abortion on demand effectively. So it wiped away the laws protecting unborn children nationwide, and the consequences of that have been more than 63 million unborn babies have been killed legally. Many women and men and families have been wounded as well. And the pro-life movement, including many of you, for almost 50 years now has been working faithfully and tirelessly to not just overturn Roe v. Wade, but ultimately our goal is to restore full protection for unborn children and to make abortion unthinkable. So that takes us to the ruling this June, the Dobbs versus Jackson case. So this ruling involved a Mississippi law that protected unborn children after 15 weeks, which is very, a reasonable law. But this law was actually a challenge to Roe v. Wade because Roe v. Wade didn't allow protection for unborn children at 15 weeks. Roe v. Wade was extreme. So, but this law was enacted, the 15-week law, and it was challenged in court because it was at odds with what Roe v. Wade required. So then it made its way up through the court system and it got up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then on June 24th of this year, the court handed down its decision in the Dobbs versus Jackson case. And the court decided to fully overturn Roe v. Wade and to uphold the Mississippi law that was challenged in that case. So the court ruled that Roe v. Wade was a constitutional mistake because there simply is no right to abortion in the Constitution. The Constitution does not mandate a policy of abortion on demand. It doesn't do anything like that. So Roe v. Wade was fully overturned in the Dobbs case. And what that means is that no longer is the U.S. Supreme Court dictating abortion law in the United States. It's no longer imposing this extreme policy of legalized abortion for any reason, whether we like it or not. That's no longer the case. So instead, the American people, through our elected officials, our state legislators, our governor, our members of Congress, the American people, through our elected officials, are able to decide their own abortion laws again, which is the way it was prior to Roe v. Wade in 1973, and that's the way it is now again. So it's up to the American people, to individual states, to craft the sort of abortion laws that they want to enact. Now, as a result of this, there are already some states that are really protecting unborn children, and many lives are being saved as a result. And that's just a massive victory. It's definitely worth celebrating. And we would never have gotten to this point without the work of so many pro-life people over 50 years. So many of you got us to this point where Roe v. Wade is overturned, states are free to decide abortion policies, and some of them are protecting unborn children and saving lives now. And that's a huge, huge victory. But having said all that, there's a lot of work left to do. Because there are a lot of states with pro-abortion governments that are not likely to protect unborn children anytime soon. And unfortunately, Minnesota is one of those states that still has abortion on demand. And the reason is, it goes back to a 1995 decision of the Minnesota State Supreme Court. Not the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Minnesota State Supreme Court. There was a ruling in 1995 called Doe versus Gomez. And in this ruling, the Minnesota Supreme Court said that our state constitution, not the U.S. Constitution that Roe v. Wade dealt with, but the Minnesota state constitution includes a right to abortion that requires that we have legalized abortion in Minnesota. In fact, the Doe v. Gomez ruling said that this right to abortion in our state constitution is so broad that it actually requires taxpayer funding, public funding of abortion for lower income women on the state's Medicaid program, which is something that Roe v. Wade didn't do at the federal level. But our decision here in Minnesota, Doe v. Gomez, is even more extreme than that. So what that means is that even though the U.S. Supreme Court, through Roe v. Wade, is no longer requiring that we have this abortion on demand policy, the Minnesota State Supreme Court, through Doe v. Gomez, still is requiring that in our state, here in Minnesota. Now, in July of this year, just 2 or 3 weeks after the Dobbs ruling came down, things actually got a little worse in Minnesota because there was a local court ruling here in Ramsey County District Court. The judge in that court issued a ruling called Doe versus Minnesota. And I know there's lots of court rulings to keep track of. But in Doe versus Minnesota, in July of this year, the judge issued a ruling striking down a number of pro-life laws here in Minnesota, making it even worse here. So to back up for a minute, I mentioned that Roe v. Wade, imposed abortion on demand, and Doe v. Gomez does that in Minnesota still. But that hasn't prevented us from still enacting different types of laws over the years that have made a difference in terms of increasing protection for the unborn, reducing abortions, supporting women, empowering women with informed consent and alternatives and things like that. So we've made progress legislatively, even with Roe v. Wade in place. And those laws that we've enacted have made a difference. But most of what we've done has now been wiped out by this Doe versus Minnesota ruling in July. So the ruling struck down our woman's right to know law, which is an informed consent law that requires that 24 hours prior to abortion, a woman be provided with some basic factual information before she undergoes the procedure. And that law has made a big difference. We can see every year the number of women who get that informed consent information versus the number of women who actually go through with the abortion. And it's usually a couple thousand or so every year get that information and then choose life. So it's an important law, but that's been struck down now. Also, our parental notification law, which requires that both parents be notified before an abortion is performed on a minor girl. that's an important law, but that has been struck down now, so that that notification isn't required before a minor is subjected to abortion. We also had a law that required that it said that non-doctors can't be performing abortion. If you're not a doctor, you can't be doing these procedures. That has been struck down, which opens up the pool of people who are eligible to perform abortions in our state now is much wider. You don't have to be a doctor, which is concerning. Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
how does the appeal process work on that? I mean, obviously who we have in power now isn't going to appeal it, but if that changes here and we get a new AG,
Yeah.
can he still appeal this?
That's a good question, and I'm unclear on whether it's. I think it's a little questionable whether that even if we get Jim Schultz in, who wants to appeal it, but whether it would be too late. It might be. It's a tricky situation, but we'll talk a little bit about the Attorney General's race in a minute. Okay. So this ruling in July, the Doe versus Minnesota ruling, wiped out these laws, and that leaves us with a pretty extreme situation in Minnesota. So legally, there are virtually no limits on abortion in our state. Some people have been saying, including some media outlets, some of them have reported that Minnesota bans abortion after the point of fetal viability, which can be 22 to 24 weeks or so into pregnancy. But actually, we had a viability-related law enacted back in 1974 that was then struck down in court in 1976. So there isn't a law in effect in Minnesota that provides a time limit after which abortion is illegal. That isn't in place in our state. So we have an extreme situation, one that's more extreme than many states around the country, and more extreme than most of the world. If you look at Europe, for example, most countries there have legal abortion in the first trimester, but then when you get beyond that, much beyond that, there start to be limits. In Minnesota, we don't have that, so we have a radical abortion legal situation here in Minnesota. Now let's look just briefly at some of the latest abortion numbers in our state. So these numbers come from the Minnesota Department of Health. Every year we get a report in July from the Health Department. They collect abortion data from abortion providers around the state who are required to report this information. Actually, I mentioned the Doe versus Minnesota ruling that struck down those laws. There was one law in that case that was not struck down. It was challenged in the case, but then the judge did not strike it down. And that was our abortion reporting law, which requires that the state collect this data. So we still are going to be getting this information from the health department. The latest numbers we have come from the year 2021, last year, and it shows just over 10,000 abortions took place in Minnesota that year, which is similar to previous years. But you can see on the graph that we have had a long-term downward trend, a long-term pro-life trend. And there are different factors for that, but one factor is some of the laws that we have enacted that have now been struck down. The parental notification law, there's actually a little marker on the graph for parental notification and women's right to know. So you can see those laws being enacted, and then abortion drops following those laws being enacted. And there's other research from other states with these types of laws about how they can affect the incidence of abortion and help reduce abortion numbers. We know that these types of laws make a difference. Unfortunately, those two laws are gone now. Anyway, so we've seen a long-term pro-life trend, but we've also seen a leveling off in recent years with our abortion numbers in our state. One growing concern is the increase in chemical abortions. So this is a non-surgical drug-induced method of abortion used during the first trimester of pregnancy. They're often called RU46 abortions. It's typically a two-drug process. The first drug cuts off the pregnancy hormone, progesterone, and causes the death of the unborn child. The second drug then induces contractions to expel the remains of the child. Now, this method of abortion has been increasing pretty consistently ever since it was approved more than 20 years ago. But recently, the FDA has made a policy change. So the FDA used to have a safety rule that required that this drug be dispensed in person at a medical facility, which made sense because an in-person evaluation prior to giving a woman the drug makes it can help screen for ectopic pregnancy, which is a threat to the life of the mother as well as the child. It can also help verify the gestational age of the child. The risk of this abortion method increases later, so you want to verify the gestational age. So there are good reasons for that safety policy where it has to be dispensed in person. But the FDA, under the current administration in Washington, has reversed this rule, so it is no longer in effect. And what that means is that abortion practitioners can send these abortion drugs to women through the mail without any in-person evaluation first, which not only could increase the number of abortions, the number of unborn children who are killed, but it can also then increase the risk that this method poses to women. So in Minnesota here, there are multiple abortion providers that are now doing some of their abortions through the mail by sending abortion drugs to women through the mail, which is a major concern. Another trend that is concerning is the continued growth at Planned Parenthood. They've really come to dominate the abortion market in Minnesota and nationwide. But in Minnesota here, they're now performing 70% of all abortions in the state. Most of that is at their St. Paul headquarters, but they also have a few other clinics where they're doing chemical abortions as well. And then finally, another trend is the increase in taxpayer-funded abortions. So I mentioned that the Doe versus Gomez ruling, that's the 1995 Minnesota State Supreme Court ruling, that said there's a right to abortion in our state constitution. It also said that taxpayers have to pay for abortions for women through the state's Medicaid program. Because of that ruling, we have taxpayer-funded abortion in Minnesota, and that percentage of abortions that is funded by taxpayers has tended to increase over time. So now it's approaching half of all abortions in our state that are funded by taxpayers. It's something that the abortion industry has taken advantage of because this taxpayer money is available to them. If the more abortions they perform on low-income women, they'll get reimbursed by the taxpayer for that. So we see those numbers go up as the abortion industry takes advantage. So these are a few concerning trends. There's definitely more to be worried about with the Doe versus the Doe versus Minnesota ruling, because we don't have parental notification anymore. We don't have that doctor-only requirement anymore. So there's more concerning trends that could be on the horizon.
I have a question on, going back up to the 61, the first item up there,
Yeah.
where you can get these chemicals now, you're saying mail order. I believe Walmart has that right on their stock right now, on their shelves. I know they have an abortion pill that it costs $42.
I don't
Do
think
you know what that is?
I don't think they would have RU46. The
Well, they
method
have
I'm
something
talking
that
about.
insists
They-
abortion.
Maybe the morning after.
It's the morning after.
Yeah,
Well,
which
that's,
is different than the RU 486.
Yeah.
okay.
But the other disturbing thing I want to mention about the RU 486 is the FDA is finally, after 27 years on the market, going to now do the case analysis of that. But they have decided not to report and told everybody who's dispensing it that they will no longer have to report any negative reactions to it, only deaths.
Yes.
So when they come out, I think next February, with their report, it's going to show only those that have died
Yeah.
from taking it, not those who have had irreparable damage done to their bodies.
Yep. That's right. They're stopping reporting complications except death.
Yeah,
And women have died from this over the last 20 years, in addition to all the other complications.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So that 10,136 abortions in 2021, does that include the chemical abortions?
Yes, the ones, what's that?
Those are reported?
They are, if they're done legally, then they're reported, yeah. So we're in a situation right now where the Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade, allowing states to protect unborn children again, which is a massive victory. But at the same time, here in Minnesota, we've got these serious obstacles in our way. So where do we go from here? Well, our abortion law in this state, it can only begin to change by putting pro-life people into public office. So if we want a pro-life bill to pass through the legislature, the House and the Senate, you need to have enough pro-life people in the House and the Senate to pass it. Then you need to have a pro-life governor who will sign it into law rather than veto it. You also need a pro-life governor because governors put judges on the courts. And if a pro-life law is enacted and then challenged in court, you need to have the kind of judges in place who will not strike it down. With the Doe versus Minnesota ruling, you had a judge strike down these long-standing pro-life laws in our state. We need the kind of judges in place who will not do that. And on the Minnesota Supreme Court, we need the kind of justices who will, when given the chance, overturn the Doe versus Gomez ruling. Just like Roe v. Wade was overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court, we need Doe versus Gomez overturned by the Minnesota State Supreme Court, which would then open the door to us really protecting the unborn child, that give us the opportunity to do that. So the governor is essential, not just to sign or veto legislation, but to put judges into the courts who will not strike down pro-life laws. But a pro-life attorney general is also important because the attorney general enforces and defends the laws that are enacted. And we'll talk about the attorney general's race in a moment. But the point is that all of these elected offices are essential if we're going to really make progress in terms of protecting unborn children going forward.
Question?
Yeah.
Just theoretically, if we end up with all this, pro-life governor on down, and if the time limit is run out for Jim Schultz to appeal this, could they go ahead and repass all this stuff? Only to have this judge strike it down again or whatever, or not, but could they repass this, and then now with Jim Schultz as our AG, he could turn around and appeal it?
That may be possible, yeah.
what is the makeup of the Minnesota Supreme Court right now?
It's not good.
I know. So, but just so that people know, because we've had people run for office here locally who are saying that they're gonna end abortion in their first 100 days in office, not realizing that that is an impossibility in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And just so that people know what we're up against,
Yeah.
these Minnesota pro-life, these Minnesota Supreme Court judges are appointed for life, correct?
There's a age limit,
I
right?
think it's 70.
It's
Is it-
870, they have to retire.
Yeah.
And it's a 6-year elected
Yeah,
term.
yeah.
But they always get elected
Yeah.
because nobody runs against them.
Yes, exactly. But are we 5 to, I think it's 5 against? What is it?
Is there 8 judges?
7.
Seven.
Yeah, there's 7. I thought we
Well,
were
then it's
5 to 2.
5-2.
That's what I thought.
5 against.
Yeah, I think there are
5
two
pro-abortion
remaining from
judges,
Valenti, I
yeah.
think.
And
that's what I thought.
One's
Gildea
coming up
Plenty,
for
yeah.
re-election,
Oh,
and I believe it's a pro-life one. One judge is coming up, isn't he, for replacement, not re-election, replacement. Isn't he retiring?
I don't know.
And I think it's one of the pro-life
But
okay.
judges.
but Lori Gildea is the Chief Justice,
Yeah,
and she is pro-life.
yeah.
Um,
But yeah, most of the justices have been appointed by either Dayton or Walls, I believe.
Yes.
So yeah, the composition of the Minnesota Supreme Court is a challenge.
Yeah, yeah.
Paul, the other power the governor has is the appointment of commissioners. And the position of Commissioner of Health and Human Services is very important.
Yeah.
And the one we have in there now is outright incompetent and corrupt. So that appointment's going to be important.
Yeah. The Minnesota Supreme Court is a challenge. It means that there's no simple solution like we elect the right people and then abortion is stopped tomorrow. That's not the way it's going to happen. We have to think long term and try and make these changes by electing the right people, and then we will be allowed to increase protection later on. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, now the judges that are on the ballot and they're unopposed, but do they have to get X number of votes to get in? So would it do any good just to not vote and then they wouldn't get enough votes, or they're just in no matter what?
I think they're in no matter
Whoever
what.
gets the most votes wins.
Yeah.
Right.
So if they get one vote, it's good enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
Paul, one law that has to be changed, and I did put it in a bill one time to change it, and that is, we're the only state that I know of in the nation that has a law that protects court incumbency.
Yeah.
Because the law says that it identifies on the ballot who the incumbent judge is. And that's a deterrence to anybody running against them.
Yeah.
And so that law, if we want to get competition in the judicial system, you got to get rid of that law. And I put it in a bill one time to do it, and the speaker at the time scolded me something fierce.
We're going to run through some of the races quickly here. So for the Minnesota House and Senate, these races will determine, who controls the House and Senate, what kinds of legislation can get through the legislature and get to the governor's desk. Now here in Meadow Falls, keep in mind that we just went through redistricting, so the lines got redrawn, so you might not be in the same district as you used to be. But right here in Little Falls, we're in Senate District 10 now. And in the Senate race for Senate District 10, which Steve was talking about earlier, you have Nathan Wiesenberg, did I pronounce his name right? Yes. Nathan Wiesenberg, who provided all pro-life responses to our candidate questionnaire. So MCCL sends out questionnaires to all the candidates for public office, and then we publish their responses in our voter's guide. So he provided pro-life responses to the questionnaire. His opponent, Suzanne Sakala, I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. Sakala. She did not respond, and she's not pro-life. Okay, in House District 10A, which is where we are right now, House District 10A, Ron Krisha is the incumbent, and he doesn't have an opponent, which is nice, but he provided pro-life responses to our questionnaire, and he also has a 100% pro-life voting record. Now, I also want to mention there's a group that has emerged the last few years called Minnesota Right to Life, and they've made some false claims about pro-life candidates, pro-life lawmakers. Minnesota Right to Life should not be confused with National Right to Life. MCCL is actually the Minnesota affiliate of National Right to Life. Minnesota Right to Life has nothing to do with us, but they've emerged and they've sent out fundraising letters and they've made some false attacks on pro-life lawmakers. And on the screen there's a couple websites where you can learn some more about the people behind this group. And we also have an article on our website that goes into some of that as well. But we want people to be on the lookout for that.
There's also, in our newsletter, there's a section on that also in the
Okay.
present newsletter, so.
That's good.
And it has that website also on there.
Okay. All right. Now, the most important race, the race for governor. The two candidates are very far apart on the issue of abortion. So Tim Walz says that as long as I have the honor of holding this office, I will not sign laws that restrict access to abortions in our state. I'll fight tooth and nail to protect abortion rights and access. He says stuff like this all the time, especially in the wake of the Dobbs decision. He's reaffirmed his commitment over and over again to opposing any limits on abortion, basically, any protections for unborn children. Scott Jensen, this was a statement, part of his statement after the Dobbs decision came down. He said that as governor, I want to seek out loving and caring alternatives to abortion that value people both born and unborn. So Tim Walz's record, I mentioned that he pledges to oppose protection for the unborn. He has also explicitly pledged to appoint only pro-abortion judges to the courts. He says he won't appoint any quote-unquote anti-choice judges to the courts. And he's already appointed many judges just during his first term. Tim Walz also, he previously served in Congress for 12 years, I believe, and he compiled the 0% pro-life voting record according to National Right to Life. That record included votes in favor of taxpayer funding of abortion. He voted against a bill that would protect unborn children after 20 weeks when there's all this evidence that they can feel pain. And he also voted against a bill called the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And that bill said that if a baby is born alive in the context of an abortion, if a baby survived an abortion procedure and is born and still alive, that baby should be treated with the same degree of care as any other baby born alive at the same age. So if a premature baby is born alive, that baby is treated with a certain degree of care, and that same degree of care should be applied to any baby born at that same age as a result of abortion. So you can't just abandon the baby or neglect the baby or kill the baby. So that's what that bill would have done, but Tim Walz opposed it. Now, when he became governor in 2019, he proposed a cut in funding for the Positive Alternatives Act. Now, Positive Alternatives is one pro-life law that we still have in place. It's a grant program that provides grants to life-affirming programs that provide support and care and alternatives to abortion for pregnant women in need and their families. And this is a law that's done a ton of good, helped many women and families in the years that it has been in effect. Many women have chosen life, been able to choose life because of this law. The governor did propose a cut in funding for that. The cut did not become law. Fortunately, we still have full funding for the program, but he supported a cut in funding for that. Now, when the pandemic hit in early 2020, you may recall that for a window of time, the governor temporarily suspended all elective procedures in the state. They were all suspended in order to conserve medical resources and to reduce transmission of the virus. But there was one elective procedure that was not suspended, and that was elective abortion. Abortion continued uninterrupted in Minnesota. Final point here, the Walz administration gave almost $100,000 in COVID relief money to a group that specializes in abortion doulas. Now, abortion doulas are like doulas that help women through pregnancy, except they help women with abortion. And this is a group that got COVID relief money because of the Walz administration. Okay, Scott Jensen. Now, Scott Jensen does support protections for unborn children. He previously served in the Minnesota Senate, and during his time there, he had a 100% pro-life voting record. He voted to stop taxpayer funding of abortion and some other pro-life votes as well. He supports the Positive Alternatives Act. He supports our parental notification law that was just struck down, but he supports that. He supports our women's right to know informed consent law that was struck down. His running mate, Matt Burke, has a history of pro-life advocacy. Even prior to running for office, he was known as a strong pro-life advocate. All right, Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General's race is important. I mentioned that the Attorney General enforces and defends Minnesota's laws. Now, when the Doe versus Minnesota ruling was handed down in July, that wiped out those pro-life laws in Minnesota, our Attorney General, Keith Ellison, decided not to appeal the ruling, even though it was an extreme ruling that struck down decades-old bipartisan, common sense laws. A single judge issued that ruling, striking down those laws. Nevertheless, the Attorney General decided not to even appeal the ruling. Keith Ellison also has a long history of support for abortion. He served in Congress. He compiled a strong pro-abortion voting record in Congress. As Attorney General, just in the last couple of months, he issued a consumer alert against pro-life pregnancy care centers, which is very disturbing. The consumer alert claimed that these pro-life pregnancy centers are misleading women and they're deceptive, and that people should be worried about these places, which is a ridiculous false attack on places that really just provide compassionate help and alternatives to abortion for women in need. But it really shows the ideological slant of the Attorney General and his commitment to abortion on demand and opposition to pro-life efforts. Now, Keith Ellison's opponent is Jim Schultz. Jim Schultz is pro-life, and he has said that he will faithfully defend and enforce Minnesota's laws, and he has said that he would have definitely appealed the Doe versus Minnesota ruling that struck down our pro-life laws. So there's a big contrast in this race between Keith Ellison and Jim Schultz. Now, switching to the federal level, the races for Congress are also on the ballot. Right now we're in the 7th Congressional District in Little Falls here, although we're pretty close to the 8th Congressional District and to the 6th Congressional District, so you might not all be in the 7th District here. But in the 7th District, the incumbent for the last 2 years is Michelle Fischbach. She's got a 100% pro-life voting record according to National Right to Life. She's also taken a pro-life leadership role in Congress. She's become a co-chair of the House Pro-Life Caucus. So she's been a strong pro-life leader in her first 2 years there. Her opponent is Jill Abasane. Now, she did not return our candidate questionnaire, but she has expressed support for abortion during her campaign, as you can see with the quote on the screen there. Now, one reason why these congressional races are so important is because abortion supporters in Congress are, they've been trying to pass a bill called the Women's Health Protection Act, which is a very misleading title. They often talk about it in terms of codifying Roe v. Wade into federal law, but actually it would go even further than that. So this Women's Health Protection Act, it would pretty much wipe away most pro-life laws across the country. For example, if you, 20-week laws, laws that protect unborn children at 20 weeks, those would be wiped out. Parental notification laws, like we used to have in Minnesota, those would be wiped out. Most pro-life laws in states all across the country would be wiped out if this bill became law in Congress. And you may have heard the President Biden, was it last week or so? He said that if they succeed in getting enough people elected to the Senate and the House, that his first bill that he would ask them to pass, that he would then sign, would be this bill, the Women's Health Protection Act, that would basically impose unlimited abortion across the country. That's what abortion supporters want to do in Washington if they have enough votes in the House and the Senate. And so that's why it's so important to have enough pro-life people in the House and Senate to prevent that from passing and getting to the desk of the President, who has promised to sign it. So the races for Congress are important. Okay, what can we do? I'm just going to run through a few things here as we get close to the end. Now, the election, we've just been talking about the stakes in the election, which are very high for unborn children and their mothers. So one thing that we can all do is share voters' guides. MCCL has voters guides that many of you got in the mail, but we also have them available on our website at mccil.org/election. You can find our voters guide there. You can find some candidate comparison sheets. There's a fact sheet about Governor Walz, which is also in your packets tonight. So you can share those materials with pro-life family and friends so that everyone knows where the candidates stand on life. We also have a PAC website, mccilpac.org. You can find endorsed candidates there and other information. So share this information with others, encourage them to get out and vote pro-life, and then make sure to vote pro-life for yourself. And on election day, you might want to call around and make sure that your friends and family are getting out to vote. And not everyone makes a point of doing that. The weather, we don't know what the weather will be, so you want to make sure that you prioritize voting and getting other people to vote and vote pro-life. We'd also encourage you to get involved in our pro-life educational and legislative activities and events going forward. So I'll just briefly mention some of the things coming up with MCCL. Our Choose Life Drive in December is when we will collect baby supplies and materials and resources for pregnant women and their children, and then we distribute those to pregnancy centers around the state so that they can provide for women and help meet their needs. The Choose Life Drive was created in response to the Doe versus Gomez ruling. The idea was that in December of 1995, that's when that ruling came down and imposed taxpayer funding of abortion in our state. In response, the Choose Life Drive is about actually meeting the real needs of women, not with taxpayer funded abortion, but with actual resources and support and baby supplies and so forth. So that's something that everyone can be a part of. You can contribute supplies for women in need. That's something that we'll be letting you know more about as we get closer to it. The March for Life has taken place every year since the first anniversary of Roe v. Wade. In 1974 was the first anniversary. We are planning to still hold a March for Life on January 22nd of this next year. Abortion on Demand is still here in Minnesota, and we still want to be a visible presence at the Capitol to tell legislators that we need to protect unborn children, we need to support their mothers. We're not going to go away. We need to still be there calling for protection for everyone. So the March for Life will still take place on January 22nd of 2023. Our legislative dinner is an event we hold every 2 years. We invite lawmakers to this dinner, and we also invite their constituents. And we usually have a pro-life speaker who speaks in some area connected to legislation that we're trying to advance. So it's an educational pro-life event with lawmakers and their constituents. So it's a special evening that we encourage you to attend as well. Student Day at the Capitol is an event for students in grades 7 through 12. So this is an event where students can come to the Capitol in St. Paul with us. We have some sessions where we educate them about the abortion issue and about current pro-life legislation and the legislative process, and then they get a chance to meet with their own lawmakers and lobby them in support of pro-life legislation. So it's a very cool experience, kind of an experience of being part of the political process for students in grades 7 through 12. That will take place on 2 different days, probably in March. I don't think the dates are set yet, but we have 2 different options. Students can choose one day or the other to take part. Next summer, our fair outreach will take place. This summer, we were at 91 county fairs across the state. These are pro-life educational booths that we have at these fairs. And this is a great volunteer opportunity for folks to volunteer just for a shift or two at the booth. It's a pro-life outreach, helps spread the pro-life message. That's a great practical volunteer opportunity. Life Leadership Camp is our annual pro-life summer camp for high school kids. It will take place in early July, and it's a 4-day camp. Students come and they learn about the abortion issue, they learn about how to make the case for life, they learn about how to start a pro-life club at their school, how to be a pro-life leader, and we do all that in a fun summer camp environment. So that's another thing that will be coming up, and we encourage you to help promote that event among the young people in your communities and your churches. Be sure to connect with us if you're online. Find us at mccl.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Share our materials, share our resources. That's a great, easy way to share the pro-life message. You can also contribute to MCCL's work. You can do that using an envelope that's in your packets, I believe. But you can also donate online at mccl.org. And there's a half sheet in your packets on Give to the Max Day. Give to the Max Day is coming up in November, and if you contribute to MCCL for Give to the Max Day, it would go to the MCCL Education Fund, which is for purely educational activities, not legislative or political, but just pro-life education. And if you give this way, your gift would be doubled in support of pro-life education. So that's a great way to maximize your gift, your pro-life gift. All right, I think that's everything I have, but I could take any more questions if anyone has any more questions.
Another question,
Yes,
you know,
go
you
ahead.
talked about how you don't even have to be a medical doctor to do an abortion.
Yeah.
Isn't that considered practicing medicine without a license? So who's able to do it then, like a nurse or something, or?
Yeah, I mean, abortion supporters think that nurses and other medical professionals of different types should be able to do abortions, because they think that abortion isn't a big deal, it's not very dangerous, you know. So they want to widen the pool of people who can do abortions. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, to me, the most powerful strategy would be prayer. This
Yes.
is probably the most crucial election in the history of this country. I think a lot of people don't realize what we really are up against. We're pretty much moving in a communist state right now, if you really get into the document. And this is our last chance, and I really am dismayed many times at the lack of the campaigns that we have for prayer. We do have a group that prays Thursday, which I've been part of for quite a long time, but it just doesn't seem to me like there's enough coming out about really forming these focused, targeted prayer groups. I know that we did that before 2016, and we got a president who, although we might not have liked his mannerisms, was one of the most pro-Christian presidents we've had probably in the whole, for decades and decades. So, you know, it isn't about mannerisms, it's about finding out the truth and voting for it.
Paul,
Yeah, prayers. Yeah, Keith. Go ahead.
I agree with what the person just said.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is the reason Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yes.
That's right.
And he appointed 3 justices. We have not always gotten good votes from previous Republican
Yeah.
presidents. President Bush made a great appointment in San Alito.
Yeah.
He made a bad one, as far as I'm concerned, in Robert Baker, or
Yes.
John Roberts, yeah.
John Roberts.
You're right, Trump's three nominees to the court all voted to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Outstanding, and without those 3, we wouldn't have it.
I'd like to make a comment about the Choose Life Drive that most of us here are aware that we do have a Choose Life Drive at our local chapter here.
That's wonderful.
And we bring the items to our pro-life dinner, which again is in January, the last Sunday of January. And we donate those items to LAPS, Lakes Area Pregnancy Services, and Elevate Pregnancy Support Center. One's in the St. Cloud area, one's in Brainerd and Staples. And so we support them. But I'd like to encourage, there is a program, the St. Cloud Diocese has it, I have the information on it, called a Spiritual Adoption Program. Fits very well with what you said about prayer. The Spiritual Adoption Program is a good program, especially to start when the school year starts. But to start with your youth groups or your Christian mothers groups or something. What you do is, and I've got a guide for it, if you want one, I can get one to you. Basically, what you do is you follow the pregnancy of a child that you spiritually adopt. You don't know this child, it's not a physical child that you know or anything, but you spiritually adopt this child, and you follow its development through all 9 months of the pregnancy. When the Mary Lord School did it the 1 year, they had a baby shower for this baby. They named the baby. And the items from the baby shower they brought to our pro-life dinner, and they donated that for our Choose Life drive. So I would really like to see that being done in this area. So if any of you have the ambition and the little desire to get something like that started, especially with the youth, with your, I would encourage you to do that and contact me. I'll get you the information, and it may, if it's not in this newsletter, it's certainly going to be in the next one, but I'm pretty sure it's in this newsletter that is out right now. So, thank you.
That's wonderful. Go ahead.
I was very glad to hear that Minnesota did not strike down the reporting law, because I understand the way that they're getting this very false quote that they're putting out there, that having an abortion is 14 times less dangerous than giving birth. And the reason, again, they're doing that is they're only reporting deaths of abortions, not all of the other things that have happened. But I understand that our biggest pro-abortion states, you know, California, New York, don't even have to report any of the negative consequences, including deaths from abortions.
How many counties in Minnesota have as active a chapter as Morrison County?
You guys are pretty
Number
Pretty
one.
good. Yeah, this is I know this is a wonderful chapter. I know you guys are active and you do so much good. So that's and thank you for everything you do. It's wonderful. The billboard, you guys. I haven't seen the billboard. Which side of town is that on?
You'll see it as you're going that way. It's too dark now, but as you're going south,
Going south.
just as you leave town, there's one on the left-hand side,
Okay.
just past Camper City.
Okay.
And then there's one that you see as you're coming past Royalton on the right. There's one with a Mother Teresa. There's a picture of both of those, I think, in this newsletter. And then we've got a third one out by, we're going to be putting up a third one out by Holy Family Church.
Okay.
And I feel like I'm missing something. Am I?
By the fairgrounds?
Oh yeah, we have one at the entrance to the fairground. Morris County Fairground, we have one. That's the very first sign as you drive into the fairground. There's one.
That's great.